Logo you see here at the top, the logo that you see at the top is our A's for All logo. The idea is I'm going to talk to you about generative AI, but I'm also going to talk to you about equitable grading practices, and they actually complement each other. So equitable grading practices can actually support many students to go in the winding path to an A. So this stands for A's for All. And so the goal is to try to both encourage folks to adopt equitable grading practices as well as support you in your challenge, in all of our challenges to deal with generative AI in student solutions. So I'll get right on. So I was invited to be on the engineering advisory board for both colleges at UC Berkeley, and here were some guiding questions that they suggested for us, and then I use those as lead-in for this. So this is almost like an executive summary. You know, the one-page summary of this talk is the following. So has teaching in your discipline changed from, say, 10 years ago? And I would say for the most part, people haven't yet changed. I think we are very slow to move in education. And for the most part, people aren't changing. Some are innovating with AI along the edges that I'm seeing, but most people aren't changing what they did 10 years ago. Some, I had said, are bringing equitable grading practices to their teaching, and we'll get more to that later. Have the students changed? Actually, that's the biggest change in the last 10 years. I'm feeling that the students here are less prepared. I mean, this is 20 years ago. I think 10 years ago was about a good baseline for that. They're less prepared, less engaged, less able to focus, and far too many are cheating with AI on our projects. These are projects that are take-home programming projects. We've all had them for 40 years or so. And we assume that they were doing it. And maybe in the olden days, they were having a friend help them too much. Maybe they were buying a solution. You know, if you change your projects often enough, they couldn't buy those solutions. Maybe they were going to Chegg. But now it's drop dead easy to get AI to do this homework for you and get full credit. And it looks great. It looks better than your TAs could have written. There's something called the FOMO effect here, which is the fear of missing out, which is the feeling that if everyone around you is cheating, you have to cheat as well to keep up with it. And that's really a concern. So I think there's really a challenge to what the situation is on the ground now in education, and especially in computer science where AI solutions are so good. Have the best methods for educating students changed? This is the third question we were posed in our advisory board panel. I still think that I teach an introductory series of courses. So I teach freshman and sophomore level courses. And I think, and many of us are all kind of in agreement that they still need to learn the fundamental skills, that in these introductory courses, it doesn't make sense to let them use AI to offload their thinking. So for now, we are banning AI use in our lower division courses in our first 2 years. But as I said, the challenge is we can no longer trust the projects that used to get them ready for their exams. We're seeing the same thing you're all seeing, which is their exam performance is much lower than it was. And we think it's because they had this high stakes part of their grade for projects. And so the pressure is just too great and the FOMO effect is too great that they are using it to do their work for them. We did a rough measurement and we're seeing both the student perspective. I should share this slide. The student perspective is that more than 60% of their classmates are doing it. They may be also doing it, but this was a survey and the number was 60%, which is the highest we've ever seen. And we did an internal survey who is using it in our intro course. And we give them a warning before we really send them to the student conduct office. And we saw over 35% of our students clearly showing evidence of AI use. So there's an epidemic right now, and we need to talk about that. And I'll get to that at the end. I think the junior level courses, the mezzanine courses, should ban AI use, but then eventually teach it. So at the beginning, you need to develop those skills as well, those fundamental computational thinking skills as well. And then eventually need to start to teach them how to use it productively. Now, by the way, all this said, you can always use AI in a very positive way, which is you go to lecture, you're confused, and you ask AI to teach you. That's okay. I'm talking about using it to produce summative assessments. So produce the projects. That's what I'm talking about here. And I think the capstone courses, the senior level courses, before you send them off into industry, you need to require AI use. You need to be able to have your graduates and our graduates fluent in all the tools. Maybe one of the assignments is choose 10 different AI models and support it and work with it and see which is the one most effective for that particular task. So the best methods certainly have changed quite a bit. So here's this is the executive summary of this talk. What adjustments need to be made now to continue to provide the best education for coming generations? Well, I think the most important thing you all do, and we all do, is do not curve. Remove the curve for your classes, because what the curve does, as I said, as it says on the slides, it hides the effect of weaker performance. So if students are struggling and getting worse and worse and worse, but you're moving the curve to adjust it, then no one sees any change. And it looks like it's hunky-dory and everything is fine. So you cannot curve. You have, and I haven't been curving for 25 years, so I encourage you, if you haven't joined the no curve bandwagon, please join us. It's a wonderful ride. You come up with what the standards are, and I'll talk later in the talk, I'll talk about how to set those standards. You set the standards, and then you give multiple opportunities to reach that mastery of the material. I'll talk a little bit later, but we're doing a very pilot project of oral exams to verify they did the projects. I recommend you weigh them less. So you take whatever points you used to assign for projects and you reduce that to both reduce the incentive, reduce the pressure, but also if you can't trust those grades, you cannot give 50% of the grades for free. That doesn't make any sense. We'll talk more about that later. I'll talk about equitable grading, but from a dean's point of view, again, this was a message to deans and to funders and to our panel of advisory boards and our engineering advisory board. Continue to fund these equitable grading pilots to encourage more faculty to let students work toward mastery and change their courses to do that. There are many people trying innovative AI supports. Little experiments here. Continue to seed fund that to see what flowers bloom if you can. And if you're having engagement issues, as we are, people aren't coming to class, we recommend requiring attendance, we've tried flipping classrooms, making it worth their while to come to class, maybe having assessments in the class that are worth a fair amount of points. Maybe those assessments in the class are about, maybe take the oral exams and convert them to questions where if you can fit everybody in the same room, you're kind of giving a mini project quiz. If they've done the project, they should get it 100% right. So it's another way to both encourage them to do the projects and encourage them to come to class. Again, not maybe the whole class is used for that, but definitely make sure that you're doing that. And maybe if you didn't announce when those exams would happen, they'd have to come all the time, because if they miss the exam, they miss those grades. We also need more computer-based testing facilities. I'll get to that a little later. That's a facility where you can basically offload the proctoring of your exams to a campus room, and that room is like a lab with stocked computers and lockdown browsers, and then you can use and transfer your exams to these computers. And I'll get to that a little later. But this is the high level view of the talk. Now I want to dig a little bit deeper into equitable grading, just to kind of get part two of the talk. So learning as it usually happens. By the way, I'm happy to take questions on Zoom. Also feel free to interrupt me. I love engaging lectures, so you don't need to let me just ramble for 30 or 40 minutes. Feel free to ask questions on Zoom, and I'm happy to. I have Zoom up. The way I set my Zoom up here is I have many windows, and I can see you. I can see, a lot of times people do a screen share, they lose their whole screen, but I can actually see the chat and see the faces, and so I can interact if you'd like to ask me questions during the lecture. So learning as it usually happens in classrooms all around the world, and it's so wonderful how small the world is with Zoom. Here we are talking to folks more than 3,000 or 4,000 miles away. Students come in with various aptitude and prior preparation, kind of a bell curve. You got some students who are super smart and have a lot of preparation, or maybe that's confounding which one is which, maybe high preparation, low aptitude, high aptitude, low preparation. But you have this kind of bell curve of distribution, roughly the normal curve. And the output of achievement is also roughly a bell curve. So the mantra that I think no one's really fighting. I'm trying to fight this a little bit, but not everybody's fighting. We've had a lot of protests at Berkeley. Berkeley's a home of protests, if you know UC Berkeley. I don't see anybody marching around campus with signs. So the mantra we've all accepted, the lemonade we've all drunk, is It's a fixed time. You have 10 weeks if you're in a term, if you're in quarters, or 15 weeks if you're in semesters, and there's variable learning. This achievement clearly shows there's variable learning that's coming out of that. And I think this is a huge problem for achieving equity goals. We got to try to make sure that everybody succeeds. So what can we do differently? So mastery learning is this beautiful idea from Benjamin Bloom 58 years ago in 1968, that students must achieve a level of mastery of the material, maybe 90% on a quiz, on earlier material before they can move on to later material. And he showed that along with one-on-one teaching, which maybe we can do with AI, can get a 2 sigma effect. It's a beautiful 2 sigma paper that I recommend folks read. So this mantra has switched from, let's go back here, fixed time variable learning to fixed learning variable time, meaning it may take a student more than 15 weeks to get mastery, and we need to bend our institutional structures to allow for that time. It also may take them more than 2 weeks for the project you assign them. We need to allow that flexibility, that grace of different times and different paces of learning. So the New York Times has opinion pieces, and Alfie Kohn is an educator and has been writing about this for years and years. And he wrote a beautiful piece that really motivated me. This is before the pandemic. Why can't everyone get A's? This was before the Harvard and Yale movement to just kind of give free A's to everybody. That's not what he was saying. He was saying, let's see if we can support all students to get above a fixed bar of A. That's what he was arguing for, not about, hey, let's just give free A's and be Harvard. Let's not do that. So he in this essay, there's a feeling for those of you who are still curving and still locked into the curve and don't want to release it, the curve, from the way that you run your courses. So his argument against that, this is just talking about the curve, is that some feel grades are needed for a relative degree of success. That is, an A means that you're in the top 10% of the students in that room. Well, then his reaction to that is the school's ultimate mission apparently is not to help everyone learn, but to rig the game so there'll always be losers. And this makes no sense in any context. And I'll just give you an analogy. Hopefully this can motivate you. And I'll take a question in a second, but I'll give you an analogy. Imagine you're in pilot school. So you're teaching pilots to fly the planes and to take off and land. And one year, no pilot, because of AI or something, can land a plane. But if you're curving, you're literally going to give a pilot's license to people who cannot land a plane. And I don't want to ride in that plane, and that makes no sense, right? Flipping it, what if every single person that year, through all the assessment you do, can land the plane beautifully? Are you telling me that you can't give pilot's licenses to all of them? No, you certainly can. So kind of both of those extremes where everyone passes or no one passes, the curve makes no sense in either of those cases. And so many of our classes are like that. We're lowering our grades lower than we ever have. The average of the class that I just taught had been, a B or a B plus. It's now a B minus. So I moved it 2, subgrades from a B plus to a B minus because I'm not seeing my students succeed. And I said, there's a bar and you are not passing this bar. So super important to have an absolute graded model and think about, could you actually then switch the whole model so everyone could get A's if you have some absolute bar and you can verify no cheating. All right, let me take a question. I see a hand up. Let me take a question, and I'm happy to take some of that.
Thank you. So I noticed this article here from the New York Times. I recognize that 7 years later, it is still behind a paywall, if you happen to have it.
Oh, yes, I do.
Article itself.
I do.
Share it would be nice. Thank you.
I would, yes, indeed. Let me find that and I'll share that. Thank you. Yeah. The New York Times does this paywall things, but let me get that for you and I'll share that. Maybe I can share that in the chat. Thank you so much for that. Good point. All right, let me keep going and I'll look for that maybe at another break. So I believe this is a really exciting time in education. I mean, it's a scary time. Obviously, we're all challenged with this AI epidemic, but let me tell you about what I'm seeing in the conversations with faculty for the last 5 years or so. I think we're at the nexus of a new way of thinking about education, and I'm really excited to be, contributing to the conversation in my own way. We have our A's for All project. I'm trying to do this. This talk is part of the A's for All project. I've given lots of keynotes and podcasts about this. Bloom's mastery learning paper, I talked about that 58 years ago. So that's the starting point for that. The second you might have seen is Carol Dweck's work. Carol Dweck is a professor at Stanford, and she talks about this growth mindset, which is the brain is like a muscle. And you have to have a mindset for young, this is really important for young students to not have what's called a fixed mindset, that intelligence isn't fixed, but intelligence is like a muscle and can grow. And the analogy is Michael Jordan didn't start, he certainly was gifted, but he was even cut from his basketball team because he didn't have what it takes to make the basketball team. And then he worked harder than anybody else did, and then combined his natural talent with this amazing work ethic. So really the idea is Carol Dweck's, the great quote I use from Carol Dweck is, just because you don't know it just means you don't know it yet. She talks about the power of yet. She's got a couple of TED Talks. I recommend this book and I recommend her work. So it's all in the same conversation. This is a book that got me on my journey to equitable grading. And this was a book called Grading for Equity. Again, they try to take the title of equitable grading and flip it around. Joe Feldman came to Berkeley. They had him as a guest speaker, and I went through a series of workshops for him, and it, again, changed my mind. I thought that I was Mr. Equity. I was the one teaching CS to everybody in the introductory series. So I was the one as kind of the front face of CS, but I had a lot to learn, and I was giving extra credit. I learned that extra credit is not equitable. All these things are interesting, and I recommend this book strongly. There's another sub-book called Grading for Growth. These are all the same thing. If you kind of take Carol Dweck's growth word and attach it to this book, you get Grading for Growth as a great second book on this. That's not by Joe. It's another set of authors. Similar work. Finally, Linda Nilsson is talking about specifications grading. And that in that world, she says, rather than having points, and this is also Joe Feldman talks about this as well, you should have specifications for what it takes to achieve mastery. This is what exceeds mastery work would look like. This is what just barely meets mastery work would looks like. This is just barely below meeting the bar looks like. This is far below. And you come up with these categories, like you quantize learning rather than points into these things. And then your course can be, well, you have to achieve mastery. To get an A, you have to achieve mastery in, 9 out of 10 of them or something. And you have to, so that's the part that I haven't yet moved in that direction by quantifying these mastery levels. I still want to be able to use points, partly because I want to compare this with the work I did years ago and kind of compare apples to apples. So I haven't done this last part, but a lot of people have, and a lot of people realize, boy, it's great to be able to say, you don't have to grind away all the points to 100%. Once you get to mastery of, I teach computer science, so it's recursion, intro CS, I mean. So once you've mastered recursion, you don't have to get 100% of it, but once you get 90%, you've got recursion. Yeah, you missed one small problem out of 20, but you've got recursion. I believe you. Let's move on. Whereas for me, they're losing points for that 120 if they didn't get right, and that contributes to losing points overall. So they argue that it's better to say, look, you got recursion, move on, spend your effort other ways rather than trying to get every single point. I still stay in points, and there's some debate there. All right, let me keep going. There's a second opinion piece. This is, and I can try to share this if I can get this one as well. If everyone gets an A, no one gets an A. And this was, remember, this is 2023. So this one talks about the Harvard and Yale problem. And this is also happening in high school, that if everybody is handing out free A's, this is all a really interesting conversation, by the way, to be part of the A's for All model. This is completely counter to A's for All. This says, once you hand, okay, this is saying if you're not doing A's for All, I mean, if you read between the lines of what they're saying if you're in high school and you're a lazy teacher and you're just giving A's to everybody because the parents are happy, the kids are happy, your principal is happy, then no one gets an A. Then the meaning of an A is lost. So I think we have to kind of retake the night, if you will, retake what an A means, declare to the world that it's an absolute graded bar, and we're not just handing them relative to things and curving things, and we're going to say an A really has meaning again. So again, we have some conversation about what that is, but this is a kind of that. So what I'm really trying to say by this is the bar for what it takes to earn an A doesn't change. You're not lowering what an A takes. You are holding it high, but allowing for more opportunities for more students to get to that high bar. So you're keeping high standards, but you're supporting students to that excellence if you can. And this, again, this is a belief. This comes from a belief that every student could succeed if they got admitted to your university, that in theory, someone looked at their case and said, we believe they can succeed, and your job is to support them to success. And again, I mentioned students may not get an A in one semester. They may need the break. They may need the gap of January or the summer to finish the course, maybe asynchronously, or you may need to change the course to be a variable unit course, set of courses, and they may get an A on a 3 units. If you actually declare that the 3rd unit is the material and the 4th unit is some big project, and they don't finish the project, well, maybe they get an A on 3 units rather than a B or a C on 4 units. It's an interesting way to think about it. But I teach intro courses, and this is certainly a critical for a sense of belonging. I was on a podcast and they said, Dan, what would you tell your younger self? And my reaction was, after having kind of been awoken to this equitable grading set of policies, I think I would tell my younger self that I was doing it wrong, that you thought you were doing it right, because I really think I was giving C's and D's and F's to students because I wasn't allowing for flexibility in their learning. I wasn't allowing for that grace. And I realized that these students were getting a C, a D, or an F and walking away saying, I guess computer science is not for me. And I feel horrible. I have to bear with that guilt of realizing I've turned away by virtue of not having flexibility of time. I used to say, look, we have human graders grading our projects. They need to start after 2 weeks. So you have exactly 2 weeks. And if you take 2 weeks in a day, you lose 50% of the project. If you lose two weeks in 2 days, it's 0. We don't take it anymore. That was so rigid and brittle. And I prevented students who could have finished it without cheating in 2 weeks and 3 days. They were getting zeros, where now they're getting 100%. So that's what I'm realizing. I'm realizing that there's so many things that you can do to change your policy to allow flexibility in the learning. Now, let me tell you how we're doing it. So that first part of part 2 of the talk, this comes in kind of waves. The first part was the executive summary. That first set of slides was to convince hearts and minds that you want to learn about equitable grading. And now let's talk about operationalizing. How do we actually launch equitable grading in different sections? So this is a picture of a wonderful tutor, and the tutor is working with 2 students, and this, you might imagine this is like a piano teacher or a golf teacher or a tennis coach or a track coach working one-on-one with students, a very patient, experienced teacher who knows how to give a challenge to a student that exactly meets where they are. So this is like the sweet spot of a video game. You want to have the sweet spot where it's just hard enough for you, that it's not too hard, that you can never beat the boss, but if you keep to it, you can. So that sweet spot of learning. Vygotsky talks about the zone of proximal development. It means this set of material you're working on that you can do with a little bit of help. It's not so easy that it's trivial. It's not so hard that it's out of reach. It's right in the sweet spot that Vygotsky talks about. So this teacher is great at making up new problems and giving the student random versions if they're still struggling, making up new problems on the fly. Again, this is great at small scale. It doesn't work at the scale of universities. So we need to automate this process. You need to have, very much like Khan Academy, I'm not really showing you anything that Khan Academy already doesn't do, a way to have dynamic, randomized problem generation. Again, the same kind of problems that teacher was giving one-on-one, but at scale. For a lot of students, is the top view of these students, each of which are working on different problems, and each of these students is learning in a different way and a different speed. And they're all practicing until proficient, until they're ready for that big assessment, which might come for them later. So you need a process to stay in this loop, to have this dynamic randomized problem generation, and then you'll get to that high achievement. So we have found a system for that. It's called Prairie Learn. It's created, I have no financial stake. I'm just a huge fan of their work. It's created at the University of Illinois. It's free. It's open source. They also have a paid version, which I recommend you looking into, in which you get support, and they have more support there. They ran this, and then they had a a forum where they were answering questions. They realized this doesn't scale. We need to bring some revenue in to support, to pay people just to answer questions and to fix bugs. And so they've made a company out of this. And so you can look at their thing. It's prairielearn.com. Amazing. Again, I have no financial stake. I love this. Other universities have adopted this, and their key idea, the thing that makes this so special, it's done by some brilliant computer scientists, is rather than authoring questions, you're authoring question generators. The idea, just like Khan Academy does, you author a generator that can generate more questions as you push a button that says make new version of that. And so here's an example of some of these, but unlike Khan Academy, I guess Khan Academy does some of that, they have really, really rich interfaces. The question generators are not just multiple choice. They're not just true, false. They're not just single select. They are. And let me just show you a couple examples that they show, and some of these are on their webpage as well. This is a math this is a piecewise quadratic. This is a y of x is 3 different quadratics that all match together. And they range for different ranges of x. And so here's x. And they want you to really draw this. So you're taking this and you're really plotting the points and drawing the full curve. You're not just choosing from one of these curves. Which of these curves matches? That's not what you're doing. You're actually doing it yourself and plotting it yourself. Here is a set of figures, and you want to figure out what the center of mass is. And so they're actually asking you to click on these figures to indicate where the center of mass is. It's pretty impressive. I teach these 2 courses. So these courses are great. This is a Boolean expression. And so this is randomized Boolean expressions. And you're asked to use your Boolean algebra to then simplify the expression to simplest form and then write the equation here. You're writing the full equation here. And this is like as rich as the questions I write myself. And this is delightful. This is a data path for a CPU. This is how computers work and how the brains of a computer, a CPU, works. And this is the data path. And they're asking you, what is the signal on all these lines? Is it 0? Is it 1? Or is it I don't care because it doesn't factor into the computation? So this is very rich. This is the actual data path. And they're saying, give me in red what the signals is. And you can use these very rich question generators for homework, for projects, for practice, for exams. This is their new logo. So you can use it for anything. And we use them for all of these things, which is great. Here's one example of how I do this in my class. I teach, again, introductory computer science, and I want my students to learn how to draw fractals. And so here is the first 4 versions of a fractal, but you'll notice this version is the same as this, just flipped left and right, just flipped up and down. So students who kind of go and steal the code from their friend, they won't be able to make this work. And if you notice, this is the same picture of n equals 2. It's just that different lines are recursed. The lines that are recursed are in bold. The lines that are just lines are the same. Notice this kind of TP is the same. And once it's not bold, it doesn't recurse anymore. Once it is bold, it recurses. So these lines that are bold are changed and you get different fractals. So again, all these students are getting different versions. It's not a different one per student, but I have about 10 or 15 different ones that, from the set of students are grabbing. And so you can't just grab your neighbor's work blindly and do it. So this certainly helps with academic integrity. All right. I was talking about the CBTF, or these computer-based testing facilities. Here is what they look like at Illinois and at Berkeley. These pictures are from Berkeley. And so these are computer labs. Many campuses have computer labs. I'm talking to you in a room that may be usable for a computer lab yourself. So if you stock these with computers, then you can load prairielearn's, it's called the Prairie Test software. And notice these are numbered, and students walk into these rooms. They show a student worker. This is a student worker here. And they walk in, they see a student worker, and they hand the student worker their, this is called proctors, their ID. Then they go to the software on the main machine. They say, oh, you're here to take an exam. Let's see. You could take either the physics final or the calculus final. Which would you like to take? And they say the physics final. And they say, oh, for the physics final, you are allowed a calculator and 1 study sheet you can bring in. But if it was a calculus final, there's no calculator and no study sheet. So you can have different policies for different exams. And you're going to be sitting at kiosk 12. And you set these up so that, the Prairie Test configuration software sets it up so that no 2 students are sitting next to each other taking the same exam. So you might have calculus next to physics. So it's really quite interesting. or you can block it all out for one class. But again, maybe that way there's more cheating for that. So they run it in a hodgepodge way, but we at Berkeley run it in the whole class books it for the whole day. So it's pretty clear what's happening. But they run it when the Illinois runs it at a larger scale than we have, they run it in students sit next to each other who are taking different courses. We have all the same course for a particular slot we reserve. It's staffed by campus. We've moved to this point that now campus has taken this over. We don't actually, first the College of Engineering ran this as a pilot, and now the campus runs this. They drop in, the exam is exactly 50 minutes, and they come in, they get settled in the first 10 minutes, then the exam starts, no talking, and then you have 50. They can't leave, by the way, for the restroom. The exams are all chunked into 50-minute portions, and so they say you should be able to go to the bathroom before and after, but you're not allowed to leave during the section. And you can see here there's some calculators on the side. If they're allowed to use them, then they leave them there. If they're not, then they take them away. And this, again, resolves the question of cheating with exams taken at home. So we can guarantee our exams are up to the standards of academic security. So this is the slide. If you want to take a photo of the board, I have 2 more slides left. This is it. I'm at the end of my talk, and I'll take a lot of questions, and we'll do this. And yes, so I see a question. This is for final exams as well. And so in the final exams, they reserve larger sections. Rather than having a 1-hour section, they might have it in 3-hour sections or 2-hour sections. So they'll do that for the final exam. But this is the one, take a picture of this. This is the slide. If there's any slide you have that's the walk-away slide from this talk, this is the walk-away slide. And I'll talk about this. Let me talk about each bullet so you make sure you understand what's happening. So I've already talked about use absolute grading instead of a curve. I talked about earlier, don't use extra credit. Extra credit benefits the students. This is what Joe Feldman tells me and what I believe. Benefits students who have more time. The students who have a long commute or have childcare responsibilities or have a side job to make ends meet, they don't have extra time. So even though extra credit might be meant for those students don't have time to do it. So extra credit is not equitable in terms of be fair to everybody. This is something that I've been doing. And I want to talk about this. So I'll spend some time talking about all the pieces of the slide because I kind of put them all into one. Allow for clobbered exams. What that means is you write a final exam that is cumulative. Not too hard to do that. Usually final exams are relatively cumulative. You make sure your final exam covers every piece of the course, not just all the materials since the last midterm. No, this is every piece of the courses in the final exam. And you tell the students that if they get a higher score percentage-wise, usually the final exam is harder than the midterm, not easier. So you tell them, and you have a policy that says, if their final exam is higher than their midterm, or maybe you have multiple midterms, you can replace the earlier midterm. Because basically, like Benjamin Bloom, you've shown mastery. You've shown that it only matters by the end that you learn this stuff. And if you still struggled at the beginning, it's okay to struggle at the beginning. Early struggle is okay. We call confusion is the sweat of learning. I love this phrase. Confusion is the sweat of learning. And if you didn't learn it and prove you learned it by the earlier midterms, it's okay as long as you prove it by the end. Yes, it puts more stress on the final, but if they've shown it, then you can overwrite and remove a struggling, maybe even a 0 on an earlier exam. I argue you should provide flexible deadlines on projects and homeworks as much as you can. Have flexibility for students or that deadlines. We've converted almost all, this is computer science I'm talking about, almost all of our projects to auto graders, which means we've written some software to allow for the students to work with a computer auto grader. It's not AI, it's our piece of software that does unit testing and does checking for that all the spec is met. So once we have this auto grader, we don't have the need to say, here's a hard deadline, because in the olden days, we had human graders who were grading the work, and we don't have that anymore. We've taken all the staff money that we used to pay for human graders, and we use for tutors now, which is great. As I said, this is the second part. Convert your projects to auto graders and don't have any hidden tests, and allow for infinite submissions before the deadline. This is something that's much harder to do, but I do it thanks to Prairie Learn, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. Offer multiple chance exams. And what that says is, in your midterm, I give them a midterm, and then a week later, I give them a second midterm, and they take their midterm on Prairie Learn because I have so many questions I've built. I've built over 500 questions in this pool of, it took me up, 5 or 7 years, about 7 years to build all that set of questions. So some of the questions are repeat from other years, but they're not going to memorize 500 questions. And so I have basically retake opportunities for people. So if you take a midterm and you bomb it, you can take, I show you what you did wrong. I don't give you a copy of it. I'll show you what you did wrong. And then a week later or 2 weeks later, you can take it again with different questions. Same topics, different questions. So super interesting. So we actually give 3 different chances. We give them the midterm, then a second chance and a third chance. Then we give a second midterm and then a second chance and a third chance. So we actually give multiple chances for each exam. You won't believe me, but I actually give a final and a second chance and a third chance on my final, which is amazing. So I feel really proud about what I've built to allow for that. And we also were talking with our institution about this. If the student doesn't get the master that they want, we allow them to take an incomplete to finish and get mastery later. So we also expand, again, not just its flexible deadlines on a project from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, but we actually have flexibility in the semester as well, which is great. And by the way we operationalize our flexibility is we say, I'll tell you our rules. If you need up to 1, 2, or 3 days beyond the deadline, you can get it without, it's like a pre-approved yes, but you have to fill in a Google form to tell us who you are and why you needed the deadline. But we will say yes to that. 3 days, we figured 3 days is fine. If you need more than 3 days, we have support for those students as well. Maybe they got sick for COVID for a week and they need another week. That should be fine as well. But what it does is it triggers a meeting with our TAs to have a one-on-one with the student, maybe virtually, maybe face-to-face, to figure out what support we can use and to make a plan to catch up by the end if that's possible. So there's a human in the loop if they need more than 3 days. If it's before 3 days, it's auto-approved. If it's after 3 days, a human is needed to approve it. If they say, you know what, I was playing video games for 3 days, I just need more time, we're going to say, no, we're not going to give you that more time. But if they say I was sick or I had this or some family issues, we almost always say yes, but we reserve the right to say no if they need more than 3 days. Okay. This is probably what you were talking to. And yes, I'll talk about this approval from this. I'll just answer that question. There's a question about, do you need approval for the university to get flexibility for your exam policy? I did not, because the midterms are just, I give 3 midterms. No reason that I have to ask anybody to be able to show, and I can prove that I have mastery because it's the same topics. Every retake exam is the same topics. It's just different questions and I have different ways to assess. So I need no approval for that. I did have to move my final exam, which usually happens after the semester and then they go away. I had to move it into the semester. So my final exam happens on week 12 out of a 15-week week because I need week 12, week 13, and week 14 to have the retake. So I actually stole some time from the material. We still have lectures, we still have labs, we still have opportunities for them to work on their projects, but there's no new material after that's about 13 actually. So my exams happen at the end of week 13, 14, and 15, rather than week 16. Rather than at the end, we've moved our final into the semester. And that's how we've done that. And I didn't have to get any permission for that either. Okay. We took a lot of the concerns that, the setup for this talk. The reason I was asked here is like, what do we do about project cheating? And so let's just spend a little bit of time digging into that. This is my last slide before I have a thank you slide at the end. So I recommend a couple things we're trying, and I'm happy to learn from you. If you've been doing something that's successful, please tell me as well, because I'd love to learn and bring this back to folks at Berkeley. I would say drastically reduce the points for outside project work. If you cannot trust work is submitted as theirs, then you can't have that count toward their grade. So you have to drastically reduce it. We used to have almost 50% of our courses were this outside work, and we're drastically reduce it to be 10% of it. So they still need it, and it's like giving them a free 10% rather than a free 50%. So bring that down. We are piloting oral exams. Right now it's being led by our TAs and our tutors. I would suggest instructors, if you're in the loop, if you don't have TAs and tutors. I gave a talk in Australia, and they said, what's a TA? They don't have TAs. They only have an instructor and students. They don't have an intermediate level of students who are supporting. These are often graduate students or undergraduates. At Berkeley, in computer science, it's almost all undergraduates, but in other departments, it's grad students. So the people leading these oral exams need to follow a script. If you're doing the same thing for, we have, our class was 500 students this last semester. You need to have a script that everyone has the same fairness, has the same script that they're hearing. The questions are randomly chosen from a pool. So we've written way more questions than there because we're worried, because this is a script and we're doing this over the course of a week, that somebody's going to hear the questions, tell their friends, and then they have the answers by Friday. We have to have enough of them that they don't really all get a sense of that. So we have a pool of these, and they only get one or two of these questions randomly chosen. We have a little piece of software that rolls a dice and gives them a number, and that's the question the person reads. So it's random for what they're trying to answer that time. The questions are asking them questions that what we're doing during these oral exams are we're asking questions about their code. Show us in this code how you handled this feature. So some feature was being asked on the spec. Show me where it's done. They should be able to immediately find it in their code, talk about it, and get that sense. And then it's being graded on that's actually being graded on a specifications graded. That's being graded on did they get it? It's like, it's not on a number on a 1 to 100. It's graded on a 4 is they aced it question. They really were very clear. They knew exactly where it was. 3 is took them a little while. Maybe it's a little shaky. A 2 is they didn't get it, and 1 and 0. Then you have to get enough of these points to pass. If they wrote it, the questions are written. These questions are written that if they wrote it themselves, 100% themselves with no AI support, they should ace every one of these questions. So as we're writing these questions, that's our mantra. These questions have to be easy enough that if you did the work, you know exactly where to find the piece of your code that does this and how you handle this and what does that do. And you could also point at the code, say, what does this piece do? They should be able to explain that without having to have comments explain it for them. If they didn't write the code, then they have no idea, right? If they don't know what that is. But so basically, it's trying to get to the point that if they wrote it, they know what it is. Alternatively, we're also trying, this is a brand new pilot, and I'll share this before we open up for questions for about 15 minutes of questions here. We're trying to build an IDE that records keystrokes and mouse clicks, and it records everything. So and this creates a log, an interaction log. If you've ever seen Google Docs, you can look at the revision history and see how people have written an essay over 2 weeks, and you can see what that is. There's even a Chrome plugin. I just found a Chrome plugin that can look at the Google Docs and tell you whether it smells like a computer or an AI or smells like a human. And obviously there are AIs that can maybe beat that, but we're hoping that this will at least stem the tide, that students, without having to do a lot of work, if they just write it in a natural way, means some piece of code here, some piece of code there, they're going to fail a lot of tests. Obviously, AIs don't do that. They copy and paste it and it works. But if you actually show them and have them show the process, that's more fair in terms of gauging whether that's a human doing that or not. And hopefully, again, you'll be able to signal it's natural human software development. And you can have an AI, look at all the students and say, this one doesn't smell right because this one says, they pasted in a huge chunk and they had no errors that they had. So it's like you can kind of smell AI work. And so obviously there are ways around all these things, but we're hoping that just to make it a little bit harder to suggest that if we reduce the temperature, which is reduce the number of points for outside work and have them required to work in this lockdown IDE, maybe even you reject a copy paste from outside. You can only paste within the block, so you can never paste code from outside into that. There are ways to modify to do that. So that's interesting. So you can only work within this IDE to write the code. Everything has to come from your keys. You can't ever paste code in. Well, that's pretty impressive if you can do that. Well, I'm all done. Thank you for all this. My project's called A's for All. I'm sharing what we've been doing through our A's for All project and also what we've been doing at UC Berkeley with our learner group to try to expand the A's for All for more faculty. Thanks so much, and I'll stop my share and open up to questions from everybody. Thank you so much for the talk, folks.
All right, we'll take questions. Oh, Gunjan has her hand.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah, just speak.
Can I speak now?
Yeah.
Am I being heard?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah, I was in the